Okay, that should be live, I believe. Yep, that's live. I need to figure out a more organized setup in here. Still tempted to just get one big monitor and split it. So, today. Okay, so I wrote tests around the tenant registration service yesterday. Finished them up. Those are running and passing. verify they do break if I remove certain things. So just to kind of run that on the screen. If I build that now, I should get an error, right? Address is associated with tenant, address is associated with tenant. So I need to go fix that one. And tenant doesn't exist. I'm kind of enjoying doing this from a display perspective. I don't know if it's necessary, but yeah, let's do that. And then do tenants created. And then we can run the test again. Yeah, so we still got tenant, okay, address is associated, address is associated. Okay, so we can uncomment that code and then have the test pass. Okay, so that's all very well and good. But yesterday we still had the issue of it not actually saving, right? So that's the next step. Can we actually create a tenant? If we can create a tenant fully and get all the notifications and publish the Kafka pieces, we are winning. It's created and created live. Okay, so let's go and do, okay, very next tenant. So initially we were getting an issue because our collection of domain events was not initialized, which rolled us back, which was a positive change, right? Frederick. Let's see if we get any further now. Okay, so we get here. Then our domain event was crashing, right? It shouldn't crash now. Ooh. Can I insert the value null into column name, into tenants? Okay, so we have some tenant name. Yeah. Interesting. Okay, so that rolled back correctly, which is what I wanted to see. Cannot insert explicit value for identity column in table addresses. Okay, so that's because we have no ID. But it was working before when we do an explicit add against the main entities address. It is an entity base. Okay. Okay, so let's go and look at, let's create an address configuration. Entity type configuration of address. Builder.entity, builder. As key, k goes to k dot ID, right? There's no actual explicit stuff there. We don't have an identifier on this one, unless we have that implicitly by. Oh, we do. That's the problem. No, identifier address, that's fine. That error is, well, there's two errors there first, right? Is one causing the other. Cannot insert the value null into column name, table, tenants, column null, columns not allow nulls, insert fails. So is whatever's trying to insert that actually passing in a null? Didn't think it would be. So add async tenant. Tenant is create from organization name. Organization name is passed in here. So let's just do a bit of a quick debug and see if we can understand the behavior. Now this could be because I'm trying to use the associated object, right? Bomber Duman, thank you very much for the follow. Hope you're well. Oh, Bomber. So let's get to that breakpoint, right? So we have here. So let's have a look at our data. Organization name is null. We have a mapping issue somewhere. And that the unit test is never going to find, right? The unit test is never going to find that because it's outside of. Is it TBD? He is. He is it. Jumps in. Hello. Hi, Kenny. How you doing? Good day. Okay, so organization name is passed into our use case, our workflow stuff. So if we go to our application endpoint, register, post, organization name, well, that'd be why it's not being passed in. And that's why it's passing all the tests. Because some genius decided that, you know what, I'm going to refer to it as an organization name, and then didn't name the variable properly when he was publishing the data. So that might actually have worked. Okay, we only get one error now. Okay, that's fine. Now this should be, yeah, transactions rolling back every time. So we're not making a bigger mess of the data, which is good. Okay, but now we do actually have the issue. So we get a name, that's solved. However, we are not adding an address. Let's go to our service. Associate address. So we add it using this, which calls save changes. Now I know there's a transaction wrapping everything, but it still calls save changes, which still should give it an ID. So unless the table's misconfigured, which I don't believe it is, yeah, auto increment. Cannot insert explicit value for identity column in table addresses. An identity insert is set to off. So is this a... Okay, so there's a Stack Overflow issue. Blah, 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 blah. Was there an answer? Okay, the reason for this behavior is that automatically creates a new instance and entity framework thinks that POCOs are all new entities which should be inserted. So the solution is to attach existing entities to DB context. But I'm attaching an existing object by doing this, am I not? Right? Because this associate address creates on the tenant addresses collection of my object, my tenant, it creates an address using that instance of an address. So it should have an ID at this point. It should be configured correctly, and it's this tenant. Because the purpose of this, I mean, I could do this. Well, I can't do this because I'm associating it when I've not got a tenant. But I could do address ID equals address.id, I suppose, which would achieve the same thing. Maybe it thinks it's inserting a new object, and that's the problem. Because if that object isn't committed because I'm wrapped in a transaction yet, and it might not actually be, it might just be the order things are saved in, and that often causes a problem. Yeah, that was it. Can't insert the value known to shared identifier table. That's because I don't have a shared identifier anymore. Got column. And again, these, I'm hoping these are all rolling back correctly, right? Which is good. I'm not trying to insert it. Whatever. User, I don't have shared identifier. That, okay. Oh, actually, that's a problem. Yeah. I think I do want to outbox these events. So, even though that data rolled back, my Kafka publishing is happening, right? So I'm telling the world these things happened, and then I'm rolling the objects back, which is very bad. Because when I'm hitting save changes, the main events publishes those things and clears out the domain events correctly. How do I do that? How do I do that properly? Because there's a disconnect. But this is transactional. One problem at a time. Okay. So this truncate edit data drop. I'm not having fun with data group of late. It bites me more often than not. Well, it's probably me still. Tenant management users. You can get rid of that column now. So that was there because I believed I needed to track a there you go. Okay. I believe I need to track a different identifier. Turns out I don't. So that's okay. Let's run that. There we go. So all that refactoring, all that messing around, all that breaking things didn't actually, apart from some minor changes, didn't actually cause a major issue. He says, let's have a look. So we have a tenant, very next tenant, that's tenant 11. We have a tenant address, there's tenant 11 with address 12, there's address 12, there's a new address, okay. There's our new user, Frederick Bunch. And there's his association with the tenant. Okay, so that all is functioning as I would expect. Let's go back to Cardec. So here's our event, right? So our event is published to Kafka, right? And our user's created, right? There's Frederick Bunch, right? So we've got all the right data. So now the ticketing system would be valid. Right? And that's what's taken 2 days to get back around to, right? I mean, obviously I'm not working on this 24/7, but that's taken 2 days to get back around to because I hit the use case of, okay, well, I add users and they get pushed and they if I use a different identifier, I've got to now share that identifier, but I don't have that identifier when I log in. So I need a different identifier. So yeah, Dota, good morning. Yeah, icons displaying for me today. No, it's a little white outline. Sub badge. It's just Twitch. It's just Twitch. I mean, Twitch has a habit of not loading icons sometimes. So, yeah. But yeah, I'm making progress here. So we have our domain service, our registered tenant service. We have got some tests around that, and we are now able to create a tenant. So we are now back where we started over a week ago, just in a cleaner architecture. So, next challenge to face is, I suppose, so what I did is I tested what would happen in register organization if I wrapped a transaction around things, right? Now this works because obviously we just saw that it rolled back the tenant when it failed on user, right? So this transaction isn't a terrible idea. This does what we needed to do. The problem is the domain events get published when we hit save changes. Save changes happens irregardless of transaction, right? So we have domain events that publish, and this might be a side effect that you don't realize when you're doing this sort of stuff, right? Happy path, everything works fine. That's great. But if one of these things fails for whatever reason, we leave the system in an invalid state if we don't wrap this in a transaction, because things would get saved to the database, messages were published, tell things about things, and we have a larger mess because we're distributing that data. So what can we do? So an outbox wouldn't necessarily solve this, because we'd have to trigger the fact that the outbox should run, right? So the outbox wouldn't necessarily fix the problem. I've got a feeling my neighbor is about to have their driveway relayed, and I think the people to do it are here now. Or maybe the roofing. Oh, phew. I was about to worry about heavy machines starting up right up the stream. You could do logic on the outbox also, like this message is too old, don't process it. But how would I know that? Right, what is too old? Right. And if the outbox is running on a schedule, then it's disconnected from my process. So the fact that I queue the events is the problem, right? Been processed 5 times, so I think. Right, but so if we look here at Kardec, right, tenant created. So I tried creating this tenant, right? I tried creating this tenant 4 times, right? 3 of them were failures, right? These records all roll back, so these tenant IDs don't exist in my system, right? And these happened because I published domain events. Oh, joy. I published domain events when I created my tenant and when I associated the address, right? So these events happened because save changes occurred. It's kind of like I need to gate the outbox in some way and say, hey, now you can process the messages, right? but I've cleared them off my entities because my entities are long since gone. They're committed to the database. But it's like I need to say, hey, yeah, flush the outbox now, right? Because I can't undo these events. Thereby, I mean, the disconnected, that's the point, right? Let's commit it. We need to commit everything. Otherwise, we're going to end up with way too much to handle. Okay, so created domain services, registered new tenant to include the logic. Initial address. I mean, this stuff is starting to feel much better. I'm starting to see the actual benefits of doing it this way. I really do like this. Now it's clicked, and I understand how and why things are happening. It really does make sense as to how this is going to help me. But this is a challenge, right? Moved tenant search into domain as it is to domain. Implementation still is an infrastructure. Dropped unnecessary handlers. Components. Okay. Bit too big of a commit to put any sort of meaningful commit message on, but still worth the jog. So how do we overcome this challenge? Because I feel this is the last challenge to overcome in this. I mean, this is almost, this would have been good to do at the prototyping phase, right? This sort of stuff. So I believe that the use case for register organization, right? I believe that the transaction is the right thing to do here. Essentially this is a handler, but it's not a handler by its naming deliberately to just separate it from that concept. It's a workflow or a use case, I suppose. I could actually refer to it as a use case, right? But I'm calling it a workflow. If this happens, a couple of events are put into domain events, and when they save, they publish, right? That then creates subscribers. Tenant was registered would happen in this one, right? So in this one, we turn around and publish, right? So we do have the concept of a Kafka outbox that we can put in later, but that still doesn't help us because the Kafka outbox is going to process asynchronous to the actual inserting of the events, and that's going to leave us with messages anyway. We don't need any specific logic around events being in the outbox. And to your point, Dota, stale messages it's tried to be processed 5 times, etc. I mean, the outbox is meant to sit there indefinitely and just keep trying, right? That's the point. It can get stuck, and you'd have to clear it. But this wouldn't, again, unless I put in some method of saying, hey, don't actually publish this yet, which seems counter to the idea. Depends. If there's pressure on the queue because it's stacked, then yeah, there's things you need to know there. But we'll get to that one. I mean, I think that is a problem without a doubt. I just think that is not this problem specifically, right? This would cause that problem right now. But in reality here, these messages can be published, right? These are actually publishing. They just don't mean anything because I've rolled back the data that was associated with them. So it's the downside to having the interceptor, right? So if we go to here, and this actually can move, I think, to a shared kernel because this will be used again and again and again, right? So we register the we register this at the time we configure the context, and all this does is says, okay, when I call save changes, can, I don't know why I just typed, but it wasn't there. Can, let me just move this off screen because I don't know if it's, I gotta be careful about showing my screen when it could reveal more personal information. Like I know my name's out there, but that's because I treat this as a professional platform. But other than that, we'll ask the intern, as Apex calls it. Can I identify whether save changes is wrapped in a transaction in entity framework core? Does save changes get invoked again if so? So it's nice to have the transaction. It gives us some security in knowing that if a component of the registered tenant fails, and this is a particularly heavy case, right? There's not oftentimes the need for such security net, but this again is a bunch of data that's all associated. That if any of it fails, it doesn't matter. We don't need it because it's going to fail, right? It's going to tell the user, hey, this registration failed. We don't want to keep creating bad data in the system and storing it. So this does solve that. But it's almost as if what we need to do is say, okay, if this is wrapped in an actual, but again, like it says there, all connections are wrapped in a transaction. So I don't know, unless I can identify the type of transaction it's wrapped in, like the scope. Yeah, so it's like almost as if I need to say, hey, don't do this in the event that this is actually a long run transaction. Something else will deal with this, right? And publish these events separately, and then have something that is basically no, the workflow I want, right? On commit to the transaction. But all these things have gone by that point. That they've long since gone. The domain events are not there. So what next? So another option would be to kind of create a behavior. So I know in Mediator, you can override the notification piece, right? You can create an actual implementation of, because they have a few different ones, because by default, notifications are handled serially, right? So when you publish a notification, it kind of gets handled at that point by the things that need to handle it, not all in parallel or whatever. So there is a different version. My dog's going to lose his voice today, barking at people across the street. I hope you can't hear him. I hope the noise gate's doing a good job. So it's almost as if I need to say, hey, hold on to these events. Yeah, sorry. Not much I can do about that. He's actually in another room. That's not even a speaker in my room. If I can catch him barking, I could probably put the noise gate on OBS. So it's almost as if I need to hold on to these events and then kind of flush them here and say, yep, they're good, right? Process them. But I don't get to decide which method is used for tracking the so if I go to, why is my keyboard not active in there at the moment I've opened the tab? I wonder if I can. Problem is he's barking in weird ways. It's probably when I'm talking it's getting picked up, so it won't matter even if I do it. I'm watching the noise meter in OBS. Mediator. Not J Bogards. Martin Tomars. Okay. Nope. Yeah, that's one. Okay. So use notifications. So we have notifications, polymorphic dispatch, yeah. Support open direction, streaming messages. It doesn't look like we have any overrides. So Mediator does offer different versions of the notification pipeline stuff. Yeah, it doesn't look like we have anything there. So what can we do? This is indeed a challenge. So even if I put something in with transactions in the save, that isn't going to save me from myself, because it's gonna. I need to publish these notifications. The act is, when do I process the notifications? Do I back them up, or do I actually? But if I do this, right, I don't know if I'm doing it in a transaction or not. So I'm always going to have to flush. So if I know that events have been created. Hi, Lodi Zeus. How you doing? How are you today? If I know events have been created, then it kind of defeats the point, right? The idea of this is that it's transparent to me as an application developer that events get published. I should just be able to call a method and know that the system is going to behave correctly. Yep, you were here yesterday. Sorry, I'm just making sure that the dogs don't actually need me rather than they're just barking. They're barking at the noise outside. Okay, so this is a problem. So happy path, not a problem, right? It works exactly as intended. That is perfectly fine. But in the event that some data is bad, this will fail, which I wanted to do, right? It throws an exception, and I'm not catching that deliberately right this second. All these return conflicts, etc. Morning, Sarav. How you doing? This is another case where basically this isn't going to work either, because if any of these don't do what they should do, but they don't crash, this will still commit the transaction, right? So this actually would create the right events, and it would have created the data, so it would tell the truth. Not bad, not bad. Just struggling through a design hiccup. So it's not so much of a hiccup either. It's more of I'm glad I put this into test, right? And I put the transaction into verify, because obviously this is one long process that needs to happen together, right? I can't chain them together off the events, but it now feels again like there's a design problem in that. Am I doing the right thing, right? I'm starting to see more and more that not only does at the um, at the lower level, the API level, pain suggests that you're doing something wrong, but also at this higher level as well, when we're doing more than you know, um, am I now in a place where this pattern is not actually reasonable? There's no other case for it. That's the problem. So let's think about this from another perspective, right? And I do apologize that this is the stream right this second, but this is a reality, and this is why I'm doing this, right? This is why I'm streaming, to highlight that this is something you could come up against. As for posting links. Mm. No, no, I refuse. Um, okay. The place where the events are publishing is the right place, no doubt, right? The entities are going to publish the events they need to publish, right? And I've added a few in that are superfluous, but they're there to demonstrate, right? They're there for my benefit to understand that, oh, I could do all sorts of things here, right? I've got to also decide whether I want to use the word created or registered, and I think registered makes more sense, but yeah. We have a use case of registering the tenant. Registering a tenant involves adding a new tenant record and associating an address with it. It involves adding a user, associating that user with the tenant, and then publishing that user to auth0 to say, hey, now you need to use this user, or not, here, know about this user. So an outbox wouldn't save us because an outbox would need to be processed. You can't trigger the outbox to run on receipt of a certain event. But that's the only thing I can think to do is to publish an event to say that the completion of this happened. Ooh, I almost knocked my coffee over there because I wasn't paying attention. Almost like S is watching, but can't really say anything very much right this second. Let's see. Oh, it looks like someone's thought of this problem. Dispatches. Oh, so this is another clean architecture implementation. First, a DB context. DB context base, outbox integration events. Dispatch the main events collection right before committing data into the DB will make a single transaction including so. Starting to feel this world does not like me right this second. Like, hey, you've got so far, you're so close. Here's another problem. Okay, so this is implemented the exact same way as the others. Right, so this goes into our I've got to remember to save these as a collection of some form. So this is my I'm going to move you to that side, Delta, but your stuff counts. This is my collection of clean architecture implementations, right? Running those 2-minute ads seem to have helped a lot, I hope, at the beginning of the stream. So the DB context base injects a mediator. But the problem is I don't have control over this part very easily. And what's this? How's this used? Okay, so let's have a look at his application. No, that's not the application. Let's share kernel, DDMart, ordering, application, integration events, services. I don't want the events, I want actions. Oh my goodness me. Holy, wow, that's changing it up entirely. Someone took it and flipped on its head. Whoa, every single object has application core infrastructure. But application is... What? Okay, I'm going to take a quick break. I need to go and look after these dogs because they're going crazy. I need to let them see outside. Yeah, I'm going to run an ad while we're in there, so it should hold the ads off until the end of the stream then. So I will be right back. Okay, I am back, hopefully. I have two dogs that are terrified to go outside. So they won't go outside. But they just wanted some attention, so hopefully they're okay now. Now they can see what's happening. Okay. Amal, Happy New Year. Thank you. Hope you are well. Oh. This is blow. Okay, be careful putting them in the advertiser stream. Just put them in the useful learning links or something. I probably need to change that up as advertiser stream, like announcements versus that. Right, so let's have a look. Doing good, thanks. Nice, nice. Hope you had a nice end of the year. Okay, so this is what we're doing right now, right? Mediator. So we are essentially doing this in our interceptor right this second. And this works, but we're not using mediator. So this is okay. So I get the point. I get the this organization is mind bending compared to what the other ones are. Dispatch integration events async. Dispatch domain events async. So we publish them, and then we outbox integration events. So this is differentiating between things to go to Kafka and internal events. Whereas what I'm doing is I'm using the internal events to say, yeah, I need to publish this to Kafka, which I kind of prefer. I don't necessarily like the idea of the application deciding the greater thing. And in some cases, I need to go and query further data anyway, because I don't have data available. So the integration events, I'm not going to do that. I think I like the style that we've got right this second. I can see the benefit of it, but we don't have enough information for a lot of those integration events. Not the way I'm planning on using them anyway. But we still need to overcome this one, right? This dispatch domain events, right? So in DB context base, we inject the mediator into DB context now. So those two are intertwined no matter what. And ignore aggregate root. So there is no ignore domain events. That's fine. Why do we need to ignore aggregate root and then ignore the properties on the... Worry about that later. It's this part that I'm interested in. I'll move all those things afterwards. Now let's been to sign in. Create a full account. I'm signed in on that mediator on that medium. It's just So, okay, here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna clone the repo, so we can actually look at the code, and I can do some navigation of the code. Open stream view. This domain, the domain is made up of 3 subdomains: catalog, ordering, and payments. Okay, so catalog, ordering, and payments in common. So common contains the pieces we need, right? Common contains the actual, yeah. So I'm not too worried about integration events, right? Those are the things that would go to Kafka, right? I'm not really worried about them. We're not worrying about the outbots there. The outbots we'll worry about separately. And the way I've got the Kafka stuff, that is completely transparent to the application, which I kind of prefer. So we have a DB context base. This DB context base requires mediator. Right. Order generator, orders repository, unit of work. So my concern here is not so much that this is impossible, it's more I'm using the specifications library. The specifications library itself comes with other pieces, right? So I now have to start worrying about, will this fit well with that, right? So this repository here is based off of the orders repository, which is based off of a repository which is his own wrapper around, right? Around DB set. It's funny. I'm looking at all this code. I'm looking at this code from these well-respected people. I'm thinking the number of times I've seen the criticism of, oh, you shouldn't put repositories around DB context because it already is repositories. And yeah, you shouldn't. Sometimes you just gotta do something. Okay, so the way he does this is he calls commit async on the repository. Yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. Sometimes you've got to just choose a path, right? Do the thing. Don't worry about whether the thing is right or not. Do the thing. If it feels bad, change the thing, right? Adapt. Okay, so this is not going to work any more than the other one, right? Because the problem is this commit async, and again, I suppose that I assume, Esther, that the article that you're sending actually does give some context as to why this is happening, right? But this commit async in here, if I go to implementation, right? Dispatch domain events collection right before committing data. I can't do this on the DB context. I can't do this on the repository. The repositories have long since gone, right? I need this as an encompassing act. Now, if this was something that Entity Framework exposed, and I could say on a transaction commit in DB context, right? Then that would be helpful, because I could say, actually, on save changes, we don't do publishing of domain events. We collect them in save changes, but then we publish them in our interceptor, right? Like, because this doesn't overcome the problem. Like if there was another event in here, protected override. Like if there was an event that was like, because we do that on saved changes, right? So it's kind of post saving, but the problem is that when it's wrapped in a transaction, that's not really committed to the database, right? So our transaction commit is what actually stores the data. And again, in this workflow instance, or this use case, right? All of these things happen, and then it commits, right? It actually flushes it to the DB. But those events that have happened and been processed all the way down the line. So even if we were to use something like this doesn't save us from that, because this is almost the exact same thing, unless I'm misunderstanding it. But I believe. Unless main events map to integration, calling media to extension, dispatch, integrate. Right. Application services, ordering application services, ordering integration event mapper. I don't know if anyone saw the video that Sarav posted yesterday in the random chat. I actually sat and watched that one, and it's an interesting thing because I'm going to hit the exact same problem. I know I'm going to hit the problem, so I'm kind of like, that's interesting. And this kind of looks something similar, where it's saying, okay, let's wow, this just maps a domain event to an integration event. So this would essentially do what my handles are doing now. But again, it doesn't. I'm not visualizing how this really changes my problem, in so much as I still have an underlying issue of this isn't necessarily the problem, right? The issue is one of, when do I actually distribute these events, right? So, and I really wish I was better at diagramming. Like if I could draw, I could actually draw this a lot easier than I could actually describe it. But I go in to create a tenant. That tenant publishes a tenant created event, right? I add that using Ardalis's specifications library, which immediately calls save changes. We're wrapped in a transaction, but those events get published and the notification stuff happens now, right? Because of the way that the underlying notifier works. So those events, those domain events are published, and the handler for them picks them up and does what it needs to do, right? Which is publish a Kafka message. Then I go to the next piece and it fails. Rolls back the transaction and removes the tenant, because that tenant was actually created as part of a transaction. It's the disconnect between entity framework and the actual underlying system transaction, right? Because the transaction is lower level and is hooked into the SQL context. So it rolls back that data, right? So even though entity framework's done everything it knows to say, hey, yep, commit this data, that's the purpose. The transaction now says flush it, right? So we kind of need that transaction to also say, oh, flush the events as well and actually let them free. But I don't know the difference between a transaction wrapped save changes and a save changes, because all save changes are transaction wrapped by default, even if it's just a little tiny transaction. An atomic transaction, I suppose, is a better word. So I don't know the difference between the two. So I would always have to hold on to the domain events until I said flush them, which seems counterintuitive, because now we have events that we know, we have to know that we're going to flush the events, whereas right now it's implicit, right? We don't have to care, right? They happen, and the things that we need to do are hooked up to them without any sort of concern. So we can say, okay, when this happens in the system, we need to do something. We just write a new subscriber, right? Because we know the event occurs. We don't have to hook it into anything. It just happens. And that's kind of one of the benefits of this. But if we have to actually start publishing or saying that things need to be published or whatever, then we're kind of counter to the point. But yeah, this I get what this is doing, but it's not. And I suppose unit of work is the actual. Unit of work is just a wrapper. But again, all these have to be called, right? This is what I'm trying to avoid. Because in this instance, in my instance, right, I don't have any of those repositories, right? I don't have a tenant repository or a tenant user repository or a user repository or any of that to say commit, right? And that's the issue. Here, I need to say now do events. But there's no interceptor for transaction. There's nothing, because then I could say, hey, create an implementation of the notification system that backlogs messages. So it doesn't immediately handle them. It holds on to them until it's told flush them. And then I could hook that in. That would be a cleaner pattern, right? It still have its issues. So as much as, I get this. It makes sense. And this won't be something that I've just come across, right? This is something that happens. This is just something that we've got to figure out what can we live with is a question next, right? I think I'm at the point where I realize there's going to be a messy solution, or there's going to be a less than perfect solution, right? So what can I live with? Because I don't understand. Oh. Saga doesn't help it, because the Saga just doesn't. It's not like I can chain these events together and then say, yep, now when you receive this event, now go actually and do the processing, right? That would be a way. Right, because what I could do is say, I think it's okay is this okay to publish a domain event out of this? Out of a workflow? Is that acceptable behavior in this world? Let's ask the intern. Can an application service publish a domain event? I don't think it should do, but what does the intern say? No. sorry, to ensure consistency in the DD amount example. But I doubt he's using. Let's go back and read that comment, actually. It's on here. Hey, Block Designs. What's up? How are you doing? Welcome. Dispatch domain events collection. Right before committing data, EF save changes into the DB will make a single transaction, including side effects from the domain events, which use in the same DB context with instance per lifetime scope or scope lifetime. Integration events will be stored in the integration event outbox ready to be published later. After executing this line, all the changes from the command. Yeah, so I mean, it acknowledges that a transaction exists, but that doesn't solve the problem, right? Right before committing data, yeah, because if it's not wrapped in a transaction, good morning, Mr. Anhorn. If it's not wrapped in a transaction, EF will create a transaction, commit the data, and flush the transaction or complete the transaction, right? If it's wrapped in a transaction, that complete doesn't happen, and that data is held in limbo. And if that transaction rolls back, it just discards it. If it commits, it flushes it into the DB, right? So Entity Framework does not know about the scope of the transaction at the point we're calling save changes, right? It just knows that it isn't a transaction because it always is. Our transaction scope is just larger in this case. So we come up against a design problem, Mr. Anhorn. I don't know if you've met this one. So what I did is I wrapped the workflow or the use case essentially for registering organization in a transaction. And this does all the things, right? It registers the tenant, which we called in our new service. It registers a user. It associates the tenant with the user. It then publishes the user information to Auth0. And then it completes the transaction. If one of these steps fails, it rolls back, so we don't end up with data. But we do have notifications that get published on the domain events, right? So we get domain events, which are essentially notifications in Mediator. They are published and they are actioned throughout this life cycle. And what happens is we get events, right? Thank you for the look, Apex. Good morning. But now we have an issue in that these events have published, they've gone to Kafka because they got picked up and processed, but the actual transaction then rolls back and removes all the data. So now we have lies published. So how do we handle this? I need to figure out a way. Can I save a tab group, by the way? Because this is not that one. Where's my... Yeah, this is my... I'll have to say that later. That's kind of my... Oh, I've had this issue before. Oh, okay. Now's where you say, oh, it's really simple. You just do this and add this one line here. So for those new joining the stream, this is kind of typical of my stream. In so much as what I'm trying to do is build real software, right? I'm building this application with the intent of it being a real platform, right? So I'm trying to share that journey from the ground up. This code is not open sourced, but it is. Parts of it will be available, and I do plan to do a kind of spin-off project that is more representative of the overall architecture, but is going to be open sourced. So I'm trying to share the challenges, the successes on the stream, purely to share what it's like to actually develop a big application. I solved it by having a rollback command. It's not simple, but what I would not publish events until what I would do, not publish events until after the transaction was completed. So that's what I'm kind of stuck on, right? Because the domain events are published as part of save changes. So they're on the repository. They're happening when we add objects to the repository, right? I have none of those repositories here, right? They're all these are all distributed, right? Because the mediator's sending the commands, right? So the events have happened. The objects have long since gone. And an outbox won't save me because I don't know, because the outbox will process independently, unless a domain event outbox is not the same. And the domain event outbox is I inject, because I have to do it all the time, right? If I have that, and that has, right? Can you hook into the transaction at the publish of the event? No. So here's what I just learned. I mean, that might be my option, by the way. So we have an interceptor. The interceptor is on saved changes. Entity framework always has a transaction. No matter even if it's tiny, it has no concept of no transaction here. So I don't know whether there is an encompassing transaction. So here I'm publishing the domain events into the publisher, right? Now I could put the outbox here and then process the outbox, but that means every time I have every time I use this, I have to now inject the outbox and publish the outbox, or flush the outbox essentially. Or create an override in some way, shape, or form to add async, which actually says, okay, you know, can you add a callback to the transaction completed? No, there's nothing on transaction, right? No, there's absolutely no parameters. Isolation level recommitted. George Smileface just popped in to say hi. I'm at work and have a meeting in 4 minutes. George, good morning or good day. Thank you very much for stopping by. Appreciate it. Hello. Not where I wanted to get stuck today, but it is a very relevant piece, and this will have massive impact. So if I swap the publishing for an outbox, right, that solves one problem, that the outbox is there. Now, I could say on any, so if we could, let's call that use case. Just, this is kind of messy, right? Let's say we call that use case. And what we could do is, in theory, create some sort of pipeline around here. It might be easy to just implement a request scoped outbox pattern and add event to that and complete that after the transaction. Right. My pleasure. If you're still streaming now, I'll come back. Yeah, I wish. Unfortunately, work. This starts to feel a little happier, but it does mean that everything I do from the perspective of the API level has to be a use case. I can never just call I should never just use this. That seems awfully technical. Yes. Are you implementing unit of work? No, no, I'm not implementing unit of work. Yeah, I'm implementing unit of work. And Essa was pointing us in the direction of this application, which does have a unit of work, right? They put repositories around DB context the same way that the same way that our DOS specification does, but then has a unit of work which you then commit on. But you have to call commit on the actual repository. I don't have the repositories here. This is one long transaction in this case. In normal world, right, I can just call a handler. Right, and I don't feel there is a need. Yeah. So apart from the really messy name, I don't like this, the use case thing. But if I treat these as if I say a use case does this, because I have structure around this, I've kind of mimicked the behavior of mediator, but to kind of wrap that behavior. If I say, okay, you have to invoke a use case, or you can just assume you have perfect code and it will never fail. See, I considered that. But considering what I've gone through the last week or so in doing this application change, I'm starting to believe I'm not perfect. But my point is that what I could do is pipeline this behavior so that I always commit on a use case, right? So if I put a outbox on this and put a commit on this, then if this fails, I can know the difference. And that way, my workflow is my workflow. And I don't have to do anything special. The only challenge I have then is that I have to then potentially create a pipeline for non-wrapped. What it means is that I always have to have a use case from this side, which I don't think is unrealistic, right? So there's always a reason for doing something, right? Whether that use case just calls one thing, mediates one thing, there's no mediator at this level. There is only ever a use case, and the use case is invoked, and in this case, register organization is our use case, and that has the wrapper. That would solve the problem if I implemented the outbots, because then I can inject my outbots into my base use case all the time. Or I can pipeline it again, and I can wrap that behavior so that this by default has no knowledge that it's using an outbox, and it just commits. I am open to thoughts and opinions on that solution. Am I overcomplicating it there? Probably. Is this a realistic use case? Yes, it is. And I don't want to publish those domain events unless I need to. I think my confusion is why the dispatching of events is after the commit and not the moment before. Well, so this use case is I'm registering a new organization, right? Registering a new organization comes with several pieces. First, we register a tenant and an address. Those two pieces are kind of interconnected, right? So we're registering the actual name of the organization as a tenant, and then we're registering the address associated with them. We then add a tenant user. So now we're associating that user with the tenant itself. And now we publish to auth 0 a register user. If one of these steps fails, this transaction rolls back, which is what I want to happen. I do not want data in here, right? So that happens, that transaction does roll back effectively. The problem is those domain events are published when we call save changes on DB context. DB context does not know that it is in a transaction, so it does not know the difference between save changes and save changes when it's in a larger transaction, an encompassing transaction. So we will always publish the domain events. The domain events are published serially and are then picked up by subscribers and then published straight to Kafka. They don't know, they don't have any concept of why they've been published, they just know they've been published and they should do something, which is correct. So the goal here would be to say, okay, well, in the register organization use case, when we definitely know that we've finished everything, now release those events, because now those events can process, because they actually are valid. I think you cannot manage different resources in a single transaction here. This situation is similar to the 2PC two-phase commit pattern. I think you cannot manage different resources. I do apologize if ads are about to start for anyone. If you want me to hold up, let me know. Manage different resources in a single transaction here. Why? This is exactly what I want to happen, though. This is the behavior I need. It makes sense to me. Because if this fails for whatever reason, then the user just gets told, nope, I can't, we couldn't register you. We don't have any residual data left. And I need to just refresh what you mean by two-phase commit pattern. Nice, it didn't put a full minute-and-a-half ad break on it, just caught up the difference. So the ads should only run for another 20 seconds. In a normal execution of any single distributed transaction, the protocol consists of two phases. The commit request phase, in which a coordinated process attempts to prepare all the transactions participating processes. The commit phase, in which, based on voting of the participants, the coordinator decides whether to commit or abort the transaction. No, these events do not get added to the DB, right? That's part of the problem, right? Is I could flush them or clear them out, right? But again, I don't want to necessarily make it a component of every single time I touch an entity that has domain events to say, oh, now I need to clear the domain events. Well, that's kind of what I'm trying to do, right? I'm trying to say, if I change this to be an outbox, that moves the problem to a later point, right? So if I make this an outbox, then those events will publish, but those events will publish, but they'll sit there and wait, right? Right. I have that book, yes. So I'm trying to async them essentially by saying, okay, well then in my use case, if I can say now flush the outbox implicitly, right? So I don't have to make it, I don't want to make this, the thing I'm fighting back against is I do not want to make this a design consideration of every single piece of code I write where I have to say, oh, now flush the outbox, now flush the outbox. I don't want this code necessarily to know about the outbox. It shouldn't care. And that's kind of the benefit of doing it this way, right? The events are disconnected from the actual actions I'm taking. They're domain events, right? They're happening in here. This adds a domain event when it does something, right? I don't care. Previously, what I was doing is when I was registering a new user, I would add the user. So if I go here, right, I would add the user and publish the event. But now I don't have to worry about that. It's all implicit. But the problem is this add async calls save changes. Save changes underneath is what's triggering my interceptor, and now that is publishing the events, but then the transaction fails, it rolls back, right? So my proposal is I say that I can only ever have a use case from the API level. I only ever use a use case. A use case I can add into the pipeline that it will have an outbox commit or whatever, and post execute, it will call outbox.commit, which will then publish those events for real. That way I can always wrap the behavior. I don't have to worry about domain events publishing because they won't publish until I tell it, but I don't have any. You need to change the Kafka side with transactions. Is this possible? I'm not touching Kafka right now. I need to change the Kafka side. No, Kafka can't. Kafka's not involved in this. Ugh. You're right. Because technically all this is wrapped up in that same transaction. It doesn't know about it, but it's also, there's a word for that, right? Where it's kind of oh wow, my dogs are all out of sorts. They're just wandering around the room. They just don't know what to do with all the noise outside. Not settling at all. Because that would be, because you're right, Esther, in so much as that would be the other option, right? It would be say, hey, make the Kafka piece understand that this transaction rolled back, and then because those Kafka pieces happen in the side of the same transaction, but I don't know how to. There's a word that's escaping me. Um, um, not where I want it to be today. Come on, think. Messaging, Kafka, publishing, Kafka publisher, enlist. Yeah, enlist. Mm. I'm gonna try something. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to. I'm wondering if that flush is actually doing the wrong thing. So I'm gonna create a tenant. I'm gonna create a user. I'm gonna throw a new exception. Wow. Okay. Yeah, I know the rest of the code's unreachable. That's fine. I'm wondering if that flush doesn't happen, if it does it eventually, if it succeeds, but it will roll back if it enlists in the. There's a name for the concept because there is an active transaction when this code executes. If this is part of that transaction, then it should not commit this message. This is a successful tenant, and this is right. So this should throw an exception, right? We shouldn't have that tenant. We shouldn't have any tenant users. We shouldn't have any user, right? Now, hopefully, we don't have a transaction, a thing here either. No, there we go. So it doesn't. And the user will be there as well, right? So my hope was that the flush is what was causing my behavior to always get through, because it was ignoring any transactional piece, and that's fine because that piece didn't actually get hit. This is why I haven't changed over to my updated library yet, because obviously that's a NuGet package and I'm still experimenting with stuff here. So this can't enlist. That's the word I'm looking for. Kafka enlist in transaction. There's a name for a transaction that is kind of wrapping everything else. But I think Kafka transactions are not the same as the transactions. There's a word I'm missing. It basically means there's a transaction going on in listing it, right? Unless I can say producer dot begin transaction. No. Producer dot init transactions. No, there's no way of enlisting this into the transaction scope of the parent thing that it's actually happening in. So I think I'm down to, I have to create something that will say, yep, I know about this, I'm going to commit this. So an outbox for the domain events keeps the domain events being published without any interference. A use case wrapper, a pipeline for the use case that says now also commit any transactions, publish any domain events when this is complete. I think that's the safest way of doing it, because then I can write a use case and I don't have to worry about will it do what I want it to do, because it will always do it, right? And that's the problem when you're writing a code base that other people. So let's say a year from now, this actually becomes an actual product and there's other people working on it, right? If I have to do something all the time, then there's going to be a unit test every single time saying, did commit changes, or did commit, did flush domain events, etc. Could you wrap your publishing transaction using one that merges with the root and enlisting that one? I don't think that transaction, because if you look at the code, so that's kind of where I was going there. Using var transaction equals producer dot begin. Now that just begins. If I was producing multiple events, I suppose that's what that would be for. Let's see if that actually does any sort of, if this Kafka handle begin transaction, the problem is that at some point, yeah, this is all going into, this is in the C libraries. Oh, S is sending me Java now. Right. Yeah, that's essentially what I'm doing there. And yeah, I know. But underneath, this is now. Yeah, I'm now in the sea, in the lower levels. Yeah, I can't get any further down there. So I don't know that that will enlist in. Yeah, yeah, I don't know if that would not enlist in the ambient. Ambient. So normally, what happens if you create a new transaction and you're already in a transaction, it doesn't. It kind of enlists in that parent transaction, right? That's my understanding of it all, so that everything can be wrapped. And that's why, even though Entity Framework creates its own little transaction when it actually goes to save changes, because it's caught up in that already existing transaction, it works fine. But I don't believe this uses transaction scopes in .NET. I think this uses its own thing. So I don't think that solves the problem. Let's see. Should we ask an intern? Could your own .NET transaction there and enlist in that one? But I don't know if it's failed or not. So I'd always do start transaction, commit transaction, and I wouldn't, because there's no way of hooking into the success or fail of that. It wouldn't enlist. It wouldn't prevent this code from executing in the event that the transaction failed. I've been trying to think about any video content I can do, any shorts I can do. This might be one of them when I finally figure out an answer. The enlist for trigger. Well, essentially that's what I'm doing, right? That's what I'm talking about. Is making the commit of the thing, the main events happen post use case execution, so that I know that it's executed properly. So how did I get to this point, right? I got to this point because I thought, hey, I can do this. We get to a need to register the organization. Registering an organization includes many different components. Rather than having one handler do all the things, we broke up that behavior into these individual handlers because that's the right thing to do. They can be independently tested, independently deployed, right? We check all the right boxes of all the right buzzwords. We moved events out of the actual handlers and move them into the domain entities because they're the ones that understand what happens. That gives us the ability to make sure that we have, if we use the same object in different places, we still publish domain events, right? Because as long as if we need to use the method, if we create a workflow, a use case that is, okay, I need to update this when this happens and change this, right? We don't have to kind of recompose things from different handlers. We know the behaviors are there. So win, right? Domain events publishing. If we add domain events in for things that are happening in the system, I can actually hook into that and be able to record metrics on that without ever touching the actual code. Big win, right? That gives me a major advantage in terms of knowing what's happening in my system, right? I could apply the user who did things in there. I know who was executing it, right? So there's some major wins there in terms of monitoring and metrics in that I don't have to touch my actual code to know that it's that things are happening. But those domain events cannot be published until all things that need to happen. So a use case that changes different things or updates different things, if that fails or rolls back, we do not want to publish that things happen. This will be a common thing, right? This is not going to be something that's going to be a one-off, and it's only the case of this register organization. Register new user doesn't necessarily suffer too much, but it will suffer the same thing, right? Where I have to use a transaction because and then transaction async flow enabled. You kind of need that if you're making all these async requests, right? But register this suffers the same thing, right? Because I need to make sure everything's committed there. So that is going to suffer the same sort of, I suppose that works. That reads a little nicer. Does it offer me that? Why does it not offer that? Interesting. Either way. But these things are going to need to know about this. Transactions are hard. I've used a few, but I've not tried nested transactions yet. It would be a good short vid when figured out. Yeah. So this is going to be a common problem. I do not want to make it an explicit action because calling save changes, right? That's why add async does it. Because I've often fought against that in terms of code because it always felt horrible because I ended up with a unit test that said, okay, did I add this, right? Did I call save changes? Which is frustrating. But yeah, I think what I need to do transaction aware I publisher, but I don't. No, I wouldn't know. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to explore that as a thought. Thank you. But I think at this point I need to do something, right? And I want to make it so that the application does not need to care about it. So if I say that a use case is always, and it does follow, right? There's always a use case for why an endpoint exists, right? What is the use case I'm solving? Yeah. It's just I don't have any eventing on when that commits. That's the problem. So how do I know that? If I don't know when the transaction completes, I don't know when I can say, yep, go do these things. Maybe I'm just not thinking about that in the right order there. But in the name of getting something, you ask for the current and enlist like a callback. I hope my bank transactions are not global. I think you'd be surprised what is actually published. Right. Transaction completed. Oh. Oh, okay. Okay. Okay, we're getting somewhere. no, 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 no. I don't want to go do the real work. Now my brain's worrying. No, 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 no. Okay, let's talk about what that would look like quickly. So this is exactly something, by the way, that would be, if I figure this out and this works, then I would make this an actual library that's added onto the project. So this would be shareable code, right? This is the sort of stuff I want to do because I'm solving the problems for me, but they may solve the problems for you, right? So if whatever I figure out here, I will share. So if I end up wrapping stuff into a pipeline for the use case, then I will create a use cases library that allows you to do that, so you can actually hook that in. But so what this would do, so let me add mediator. Mediator abstractions. So this would be a transaction aware publisher. I publisher. So this has two calls, right? But how do I do this? How do I actually do this? So I need to inject an iPublisher, right? I need to spend the money and get my link pad updated to version 8. Really cool. This seems like a neat solution to figure out, like learning how EF hooks into transactions. Yeah. So the challenge here is this is not. Is this something I can actually deal with? Because again, I need to say basically var transaction equals. Well, essentially, I need to say transaction.current dot transaction completed plus equals commit transactions or whatever, commit notifications, right? And in here, void commit notifications. What am I, a Java developer all of a sudden? Right? Generate method. That would have been helpful. That would have just been a smart way to do that. That would have to be at every publish, since this would be a singleton. The transaction might not be started yet. True. If this is a singleton, that gives me an issue, doesn't it? Yeah. So, because what I want to do is these don't actually publish, right? These queue the message. And then in here, for each var message or notification in notifications, publisher dot publish notification, right? That's essentially what I want to do. So this is one path. The challenge is here how to, because I can't, that will create a problem. So I can't do that every time because I have to handle the unsubscribe. So I need to only do that if I'm not subscribed to it. But like you said, it's kind of like, okay, well, but again, this is very scoped, right? It's like, so I've introduced this concept before as deferred, right? So what I did is in a past piece of code, I said, okay, well, add this thing, and okay, when this happens, defer this so that when you actually commit this, this happens, right? Which had this exact same problem, right? So it's deferring the event is what I need to do. But yeah, I got to think about how I'm achieving this, because if I create a transaction aware publisher, it's not running in a process. So I don't get control over that. But yeah, you're right. That's the problem. This one would need to be scoped. And then when it finishes, it says, okay, yep. That's if the transaction is committed, we're done. But that is our issue. That is the challenge we're going to have. So if you are interested in continuing to see this, and you think this is something that is interesting, follow on YouTube, drop a subscribe. If you have any thoughts or opinions on this stuff, you're more than welcome to comment on the videos. Liking them does get them promoted up, and more people see them. YouTube is doing pretty well in terms of growth right now, which I appreciate. I'm going to continue thinking about this. I might experiment with both approaches. I would start creating a scope and hook into the transaction and list for each publish. That would act like the queue. Yeah. I'll give it a go, obviously. So anyway, I've just started, so I apologize for anyone that's about to get raided out. I'll start a raid. I'll get on with my day. Onward to PHP. And yeah, we'll continue next time. I'm going to head over to Apex, so I will raid out to Apex because he's doing some really cool stuff. So yesterday, fun! I'm on my way to Notion for more research. Thanks for the stream. You're welcome. Thank you very much for hanging out. Appreciate the input as well. Increased complexity. Yeah, another benefit. Yeah, and again, it's why I'm streaming it, right? So Apex, by the way, is doing Godot development, and yesterday he actually started doing unit tests in games, which is actually something that I'm really interested to see more of. So he's learning away. So I'm going to raid over to him. He just started up. So thank you very much for joining me. Appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day, and I will see you again soon. And yeah, we'll get this fixed. Thanks, Apex. We're on our way. Take care.